you know. Okay, so anyway, also before we get started, I should mention that some people have yet to actually post their PSAs on Blackboard. Um, and one student actually did make a whole PSA, but she didn't post it on Blackboard. And you know, I'm open, like if you for some reason are having issues uploading your PSA on Blackboard, let me know and we can, and I don't know, maybe we could figure it out. And you know, if you want to email your assignment and post it on Blackboard just to like make sure I get it, um, that's fine too. But you know, you should try to upload it on Blackboard because Blackboard is actually easier for me to monitor who is uploading their assignments and who isn't. Um, you know, like if you directly just email me your PSA and that's all you do, you don't upload it on Blackboard, I mean, that's usually not a problem, but you know, emails are a tricky thing. You know, if you know, misspell my name, for example, um, I might not get the email, you know, I probably won't get the email. Or it'll end up on my spam, or I don't know, or just fall in the sea of emails, you know, because I don't just get emails from students. I get emails from faculty, from, you know, the secretary of the president of CSI, you know, so that's why I don't feel like emails are always reliable when it comes to submitting assignments. You know, if you have a question for me, that, you know, I'm definitely more okay with emails if you have like a specific question for me, because it's not as time sensitive as an assignment. I mean, it is time sensitive, but you know, it's obviously different. Um anyway, just to, you know, get that out of the way. If you haven't uploaded your PSA yet, do so as soon as you could, because you know, we don't want the semester to go by. You know, meanwhile, you have to do like three different major assignments, you know, during the final week of classes. Like that would suck, you know. If you have to do everything at the end of the year, you know, that's why it's like a better idea to, you know, do the assignment and submit it when it's due. That way, at the end of the class, you're not stuck with a whole, with even more work you got to do, on top of, you know, writing essays for maybe other classes, or doing other, you know, projects for other classes, or studying for finals. Um, yeah. So anyway, I actually yesterday, last night, I actually had a meeting with the other Pitt professors. So, for example, I finally got to meet Rod, who is your psychology professor. Mike, I I think, is it Mike who's the core 100 professor?
Michael
Uh,
Bassett,
and,
yeah.
and I also met your art professor too. So, you know, they're saying that in their classes so far, most students are doing a good job. Some of you guys have to catch up on assignments for those classes as well. So, you know, um, it's important to, you know, get your work done, not just for my class, but for your other classes, right? Um, and, you know, if you have any questions or concerns about anything, you know, you can contact me or contact one of your professors, other professors, or contact Katie. You know, I actually have a feeling Katie might be contacting you guys in a few days, some of you guys. So anyway, you know, us Pitt crew. We're trying to, work as a team to have everyone in this block be successful. Oh, and I think I'm also gonna have you guys for 151 as well. So whomever passes this class, and which I hope is everybody, whomever is successful in this class, and takes 151 again next semester, and is still part of this PIT program that CSI is um um running. I'm gonna have you again next semester, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 10 to 12:05. So that's cool. That's exciting. And it's also cool to actually have you at the beginning of the semester rather than like right in the middle of things. That way, it's like more or less a clean slate. I could just do my thing, and hopefully things won't be as hectic as this semester. I don't know if it's gonna be a hybrid class, but it probably will be. All right. So anyway, um, this week's this discussion, which started on Tuesday, has been about content and content on social media and how that content is monitored, right? Um, Content security. So, a question that I really kind of have for you guys is, um, is censorship, right? This idea of censorship, which is essentially restricting how people say or act in public, what people say and act in public, right? And we see this, in movies, right? Movies, they have ratings. An R rating, for example, means only adults could watch this movie, unless your parent is there with you in the movie theater, right? Um, Video games have mature ratings, right? Um, in fact, there's a number of video games that there's what is the rating system for video games? I know that there is rated A for everyone, or rated E for everyone, right? And then there are other rating systems like M for mature, right? Which means it's the same thing as an R rating for a movie. Um, in fact, the Grand Theft Auto games, there's a rating higher than M apparently, that I can't think of right now. Um, but there is a rating higher than M, but um, the Grand Theft Auto games, they were originally supposed to have that really restrictive rating, but they made a deal with Toys R Us back when there were Toys R Us's to actually bring the rating down to M. So at least Toys R Us, they could sell Grand Theft Auto, copies in their stores. Um, but censorship is something obviously that's been around for a long time, and now it's trying to be applied to social media, to what people post on Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. So now, and as we also discussed, a lot of these social media platforms, they try to create their own guidelines in-house, really. Like, for example, Twitter will have its own guidelines, Facebook will have its guidelines, Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. And they have their own monitors, like for example, Facebook has their own people who monitors what people say and do. In other words, it's these private institutions that are responsible for censorship. Now, on the syllabus, there is actually an audio of like this expert who is like giving like a little bit of a speech about internet censorship, and she mentions something called oh, I'm trying to look for NetsZDG. So it's NetsZDG. Hold on, where is my Zoom? So I'm writing it in the little chat. NetsZDG. And in Germany, they actually passed internet censorship laws. They passed internet censorship laws. And, before Germany, other countries did have internet censorship laws as well, including China. But the issue with China and why what Germany did is unique is because China isn't a democracy. They're not a democratic country. They're a communist country, and essentially the government can do virtually whatever they want. In a democracy, it's a little different, right?
Sorry, wait, can you hear me? Actually, I was wondering, like, is my mic on?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Yeah, okay, cool. It's like, yeah, it's like, if I remember correctly, China is more akin to like a dictatorship in a sense where it's like the people at the top are the ones who control a lot of things on the bottom, and it's like can actually punish those who speak out or whatnot.
Yeah, and also as we discussed, China actually has their own social media platforms, and I think they do this to have greater control of what is posted on social media. And it's also easier for them to monitor what people do on social media sites. And also you have to pay for the internet in China. I mean, in the United States, we pay for,
Protection on the internet.
we pay for data and Wi-Fi, but for the most part, the internet is free in the United States. Everyone has access to it. But in China and a number of other countries, you actually have to pay for even the ability to have internet connection, whether it's through a computer or from a phone, mobile device. But again, what's interesting about Germany is that they are a democracy, and yet they're one of the first democratic nations in the world to really have very, well, not very strict, but formal censorship laws where the German government could actually take down your website for posting insensitive content. And this is a little bit controversial for obvious reasons, but also because Germany is part of the European Union, which, for those who don't know, the European Union is made up of a number of European countries where they all follow the same laws, more or less, and even the same monetary system, the euro, for example. And also you could travel in and out of these countries without a passport, for example. And Germany made their own censorship laws, but the EU was also working on their own censorship laws. So that created a little bit of a controversy. But, even though this is really mostly about Germany and their laws, it's important because, again, they're a democratic nation, and the United States is a democratic nation also. So it just implies that it's possible that, here in the United States, we could follow something similar. And the debate is actually going on right now. There are especially right after the January 6th riots, there are congressmen and women who are calling for laws, to be enacted by Congress to monitor what's being posted on social media. In other words, relying on just Facebook or Twitter to do their own censorship and have their own censorship guidelines may not be enough in some people's eyes. In some other people's eyes, it might be too much. So what I want to do is twofold. I want to play the recording that's on the syllabus, but before I do that, I think it's important to get a better understanding of NET's ZDG, of what Germany is trying to do. And again, even though it's a different country and a different part of the world, I still think it applies to the United States to a certain degree. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play that video to get a better idea of what NET's ZDG is. And then I'm going to play the recording that's attached to the syllabus. And again, I think it's a good idea to watch this video first and then listen to that recording, because some of that recording you may not get what the person's saying, because you don't understand the context, right? But this provides some context. All right, so yep.
Hate speech is sadly rife on the internet, from comments that skate the line to unquestionably offensive remarks. One country that's attempted to do something material about it has been Germany. Since the 1st of October 2017, the Network Enforcement Act, known as NetzDG, has beefed up protections and forced platforms to take content down quickly. It's 10:30. The issue with this is that some believe that NetzDG doesn't go far enough, and others think it goes too far altogether. So in this video, we'll take a dive into Germany's hate speech law and what the future could hold for the internet in Germany and around Europe. If you want us to be able to report on whatever we want without censorship or fear of demonetization, then be sure to back us on Patreon. Doing so not only gets you great perks such as behind-the-scenes posts, early access to videos, and live events, but it also helps support our channel and our content. To find out more and support TLDR, click the link in the description. First things first then, what actually is the Network Enforcement Act? Well, in the words of the government department responsible for it, NetzDG aims to fight hate crime, criminally punishable fake news, and other unlawful content on social networks more effectively. This includes...
All right, so anyway, just to recap, what exactly is the German law? It aims to fight hate crime, criminally punishable fake news, and other unlawful content on social media networks more effectively.
Fake news and other unlawful content on social networks more effectively. This includes insult, malicious gossip, defamation, public incitement to crime, incitement to hatred, disseminating portrayals of violence, and threatening commission of a felony.
So it includes insults, right? You can't insult people. We have to play nice. Malicious gossip. So I don't know, saying something behind someone else's back. Defamation, incitement to crime. So in other words, you can't say, hey, let's bomb a building or whatever. Incitement to hatred, decimating portrayals of violence. So in other words, you can't show two people fighting each other. I mean, maybe, an organized fight, like a boxing match is probably fine, but not, a street fight. And if you do, then your platform can be fined. You can get a felony. Or you could get a felony, which means typically it means you could get arrested, but in this case, you're going to get a fine, a heavy fine.
In practice, a number of new requirements were established. Platforms were required to offer an easily recognizable, quickly accessible, and permanently available procedure for reporting content, to take down content as quickly as possible. Manifestly unlawful content, the content that's obviously harmful or illegal, must, under German law, be taken down within 24 hours. All other criminal content must be blocked within 7 days. Twice a year, platforms are also obligated to publish publicly available reports on their compliance. But the main deterrent of these systems are the fines. Failure to deal with complaints within the 24-hour or 7-day timeframe, or a failure to set up a system at all, can result in fines of up to 5 million euros against the person responsible for the complaints management system, and up.
So 5 million euros is like the equivalent of 5.8 million American dollars, right? It's almost, it's 800, it's like almost 6 million American dollars, right? So that's like the comparison.
Up to 50 million euros against the company itself. And Germany is prepared to use this power. Back in August of 2019, the German Federal Office of Justice.
So in other words, they will not just fine, let's say, the sharer of the video up to possibly $6 million, but they will directly fine, you know, so Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, up to roughly, it said 50 million euros. That is almost 60 million US dollars, right? That's the equivalent. So, and that's even for, you know, Twitter, for example. That's, I mean, Twitter is $1 billion company, but still, imagine like being fined $60 million. You know, that's crazy.
Fined Facebook Ireland Limited, Facebook's EU base, 2 million euros for violating reporting obligations. However, the wider issue is invariably whether reporting Justice fined Facebook Ireland Limited, Facebook's EU base, 2 million euros for violating reporting obligations. However, the wider issue is invariably whether NetzDG has struck the right balance between free speech.
So anyway, sorry if I, you know, me pausing this video so many times is annoying, but so you can't say or post anything that violates those freedom of speech laws. And what has to happen is that any hate speech or anything that violates those censorship laws has to be taken down within 24 hours by whomever, whatever platform you're using. It has to be taken down within 24 hours, and twice a month of reports has to be sent to the German government regarding, you know, how many profiles were, you know, how many posts were taken down, how many videos were blocked, you know, et cetera, twice a month. And if you don't post it, if you don't take it down, either the user themselves could be fined a huge amount of money, or the platform can be fined a huge amount of money. And Facebook, its Facebook group in Europe, specifically in Ireland, was already fined 2 million euros for not, you know, working fast enough to take down inappropriate content. And again, this is the Facebook in Europe, not the Facebook in Germany. So Germany was fining pretty much a company outside of its own country for content that it failed to take down. And you could actually question, well, how could the German government even do this? Well, I don't know, but they did.
And privacy on one hand, and law enforcement and national security on the other. As recently as June this year, other countries' attempts at hate speech regulation have come under judicial and constitutional scrutiny. In May, and in the first piece of legislation not linked to the pandemic since lockdowns began, France finally adopted a law on hate speech, largely echoing that of Germany. Platforms such as Google, Twitter, and Facebook would now have 24 hours to remove content flagged as hateful, and just 1 hour to remove content flagged as terrorist propaganda.
So if you post anything that's quote unquote terrorist propaganda, you only have 1 hour to take it down. Otherwise, you'll be fined, you know. And then you could debate, well, what is terrorist propaganda? You know, I mean, it's funny that this is mentioned because I actually had a student once who tried to argue that Black Lives Matter was a terrorist organization. You know, so in this student's and not, which is crazy, you know, in my opinion, but this student legitimately believed that. So, you know, what is terrorist propaganda? That I guess is harder for some people to define than others. You know, and yeah, but if you post something that is deemed as terrorist propaganda, you only have 1 hour to take it down.
Fines were, however, significantly reduced from the German system, maxing out at just 1.25 million euros. The criticism of this new scheme was rife and nothing new either. All the way back in November, the European Commission wrote to the French government to voice their concerns, asking that the government wait for a common EU standard to be enacted, and claiming that the new French law may not actually comply with EU laws. That's because the EU is currently negotiating and drafting up the aforementioned common EU standard, known as the Digital Services Act. This act is designed to set a common benchmark and Europe-wide policy for moderating and dealing with illegal and hateful content, and is expected early next year. We will, of course, cover that in the new year if any interesting developments arise out of it. Anyway, within a matter of months, the law was hauled before France's Constitutional Council, after some raised concerns over how platforms were actually meant to determine what was unlawful. Critics argued that the law, as it was, encouraged platform providers to remove flagged content, whether or not it actually infringed on any laws, in effect, over censorship. Citing Article 34 of the French Constitution, the court balanced the right of the government to restrict freedom of expression and communication that violates public order and rights of third parties against the general freedom of expression and communication, concluding that freedom of expression is all the more valuable because its exercise is a condition of democracy. Therefore, Parliament has brought to freedom of expression and communication an infringement that is not appropriate, necessary, or proportionate to the purpose pursued, and therefore the law was deemed unconstitutional. In spite of all these difficulties in France, Germany is clearly not backing down.
So, in other words, it was seen that it was determined by the French, you know, courts that their version of this attempt to you know, censor its content was unconstitutional. Therefore, their attempt to do what Germany is doing wasn't successful, and it was actually you know, turned down. So as of right now, France does not have its own internet censorship laws because it violates with their constitution, saying that it was like censorship when it comes to social media platforms is a violation of freedom of speech. So it didn't work for France. However, Germany still has these laws and are still enforcing them.
Instead, it's actually going even further. A matter of days after the court in France concluded that the French version was unconstitutional, Germany passed amendments and reforms that would require platform providers to report certain types of criminal content to the Federal Crime Police Office, adding to the already fervent criticisms of the law. Now the concern.
So now Germany updated their law saying that if they find any criminal content on social media platforms, it has to be not just flagged or taken down, but it also has to be reported to the police. And that raises a bunch of other concerns, and also when you report it to the police, they actually have to reveal who posted the content. So in other words, if you're anonymously posting something, they have to kind of figure out who is posting that information. And if they do find out who you are and you're a German citizen, well, you've been reported to the police, and they could arrest you or find out who you are.
Is that social media giants are being co-opted to help the state build massive databases on citizens without robust legal justification. For civil liberty and privacy campaigners, the move is yet another step in the wrong direction, with some going as far as to state that the move violates rule of law guarantees in the German constitution, and that forcing platforms to reveal their users' true identities to the authorities without a court mandate or proper individual judicial review would set a very, very dangerous precedent.
Right, so they could reveal who let's say, they have an example here, Jack Kelly, let's say, and they actually show his face. Let's say instead it's just I don't know, I love unicorns 1 2 3, and there's a picture of a unicorn here. Well, these platforms actually can figure out who the user is, in other words, track where the source of the post came from, therefore revealing who the user is. And the concept of anonymity is kind of blown up if you post something hateful or insensitive. And, in the United States, we have a law where you can't, for example, enter somebody's house unless you have a search warrant, right? The argument here that this move by the German government would be a violation of privacy, that anonymity is privacy, and we make anonymous accounts and profiles to post something on the internet, but at the same time still remain private in a way. And so obviously this would violate that freedom of privacy, and they could do it without a court mandate. A search warrant is a warrant that's, court mandated. That means a judge was able to sign off of it. Here, you don't need a judge to reveal somebody's profile and their actual name and how they look. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of terrifying when you think about it.
Yeah, it is actually kind of terrifying. I think it has I think the intentions are good because it's exposing people who are, sharing, dangerous information. But at the same time, if let's say you shared something and you didn't intend it for it to be harmful, but then it gets this flag that it is harmful, now you're now exposed for the whole world, essentially, right?
In 2018, NetzDG, as it was back then, without any of these new proposals, was already highly, highly criticized. Human Rights Watch, an international non-governmental organization advocating for, you guessed it, human rights, called out the law directly. The Germany director of the Human Rights Watch stressed that governments and the public have valid concerns about the proliferation of illegal or abusive content online, but the new German law is fundamentally flawed. It's vague, overbroad, and turns private companies into overzealous censors to avoid steep fines, leaving users with no judicial oversight or right to appeal. In their eyes, this opens the path for far more aggressive legislation by other countries, using the already flawed German model as a basis. This new reform only adding to the laws may seem to have come out of nowhere, but actually it's anything but. The impetus of the reform being the 2019 murder of local German politician Walter Lübcke by a neo-Nazi, a murder preceded by a number of targeted threats and hate speech, as Lübcke had become the face of Germany's refugee policy, a highly controversial policy, which, if you want...
So, in other words, this law that is being put into place by Germany was put in there because people on social media who was against refugees and were essentially neo-Nazis, they didn't like this refugee proposal by this particular politician named Walter Lübcke. My German's not very good, so I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, but anyway, and I know the guy just said it in the video, but I don't know. I'm not going to go back to just so I know how to pronounce his name correctly. But anyway, the point is, people on Facebook or on social media. I'm not even sure if it was Facebook per se, but on social media was organizing pretty much an assassination of this politician. And the argument is that maybe this politician's life could have been saved if the central, German government actually enacted laws that would then prevent, this organization of hateful people from actually happening. And you do see something in the United States. The argument is if there was tougher censorship laws in the United States, then maybe the riot on January 6th could have been avoided. Maybe, that's the debate. That's a reason why this is now a political issue. In other words, if the US government did something sooner, maybe there wouldn't have been a riot, at the Capitol building back in January.
We can cover it in another video. Just let us know in the comments below. Anyway, the reforms to force police notifications aren't even the end. Wider reform is ongoing, with objections ranging from strengthening users' rights and making reporting channels more friendly to simplifying the appeals process and the significance of transparency reports. A spokesperson on legal affairs for the Social Democrats,
So anyway, they are trying to make it not as harsh, right? They're trying to implement some kind of appeals system. So again, let's say your channel gets flagged and you're fined, I don't know, a ridiculous amount of money. You can appeal the flag and argue why you actually didn't commit any hate speech at all, or I don't know, or maybe it was spam that was then like somebody hacked into your Facebook account, and try to like sabotage your Facebook. That there's now an appeals system so you could defend yourself. But still, people still don't like the German law, even with these more user-friendly amendments.
The coalition party in Germany stressed the importance of the move. We have to do more to prevent hate and slander from spreading online. No one's legitimately questioning the need for the protections and the need to take down hateful content, the issue being achieving some semblance of balance. As we said near the top of the video, it's about achieving the right balance between free speech and privacy on one hand, and law enforcement and national security on the other. Something highlighted by a German MP for the opposition Green Party when they said, "What we're debating here in Berlin has great relevance for all democracies, whether they're in Europe or elsewhere in the world. We're walking a tightrope, having to balance the fight against disinformation, incitement, and slander on one side with the right to free speech on the other, which is of paramount importance in democracies. To come up with a law that's both balanced and effective is far from a trivial task." Germany already has some of the strictest laws on hate speech in the world. Inciting hatred against national, religious, ethnic, or racial groups has already been outlawed for years and years. So is the
All right, so recap, little bit of a recap. Germany bans any hatred against national groups, religious groups, ethnic groups, and do they repeat religious groups again?
so is the use of racial
So in other words, you can't say anything that's that would be offensive to a specific ethnic group. You can't say anything offensive to a specific specific religion. Otherwise, you'll get into a lot of trouble. And also, as we see here, you can't use racial slurs or display Nazi symbols, right? So even having a picture of a SWAT, like let's say you walked into school with a shirt that had a giant swastika on it, you get in deep trouble. Here in America, somebody might write an angry Facebook post about you, and maybe you'll get fired from your job if you have one, but you won't go to jail.
slurs and displaying Nazi symbols. But for many German policymakers, Lübke's murder highlighted that NetzDG doesn't go far enough, that more work needed to be done to protect people on and offline. But what do you think? Is NetzDG a template for other countries to use in order to regulate online content, or does it impinge on key freedoms? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure.
All right, so if you want to let them know your thoughts, you can comment below the video. So, I mean, I guess a question is, does it actually set a potential template for other countries to follow, or does it cause more harm than good? Because again, I do think it has good intentions. Right? Because, hate speech on the internet is potentially problematic, right? But I also think the way that it tries to go about punishing hate speech might be a bit too harsh. Well, I mean, I could ask you guys, what do you think? But before I do that, there is a website that I actually found pretty interesting, right? I just typed in, this article called "Social Media and Online Speech: How Should Countries Regulate Tech Giants?" Right? And the again, I know you didn't read the article, but I'm just gonna highlight some parts because I did find it very interesting. Okay, so in other parts of the world, like it says here, the riot at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th is not just one example of violence, which national security experts say was fomented in large part on social media platforms. Elsewhere in the world, social media has contributed to religious and ethnic violence, including against Muslims in India and Rohingya in Myanmar. And it's a real shame because there are even some YouTube videos where if you go into the comments section, you'll hear like people write really terrible things. And I mean, we could speculate as to why anyone would say something, like one time I read, and again, I read this on YouTube in the comments section that really bothered me. And I don't remember which video it was. So, but the comment was, kill all the Muslims in Europe, and it was just like, oh my God, that's horrible, but yet somebody had the balls to actually post that comment. It's just, I mean, it's obvious what something like that could lead to. Somebody might be like, yeah, you're right, and actually do that, But anyway, I want to skip to here because, first of all, this is a little bit of a chart about how many users there are for some of the most popular social media platforms. So, and this is as of January of this year. So in Facebook, there are 2.7 billion users. 2.7 billion users for Facebook. For YouTube, there are 2.3 billion users. And this doesn't even acknowledge how many people actually like go on to YouTube to watch videos daily. This is just how many people actually have YouTube channels. So the number really of people who are watching YouTube videos, obviously that could be a lot more than just 2.3 billion.
It's 11 o'clock.
Does anyone know how many people actually live on the planet?
Well, I know for certain that our population, I think, has actually crossed the zillion, like at this point, or is that even a word, to be honest? Like it's like a zillion. Like is that it's definitely over that now. Like I know we actually passed that. Like our population is continuously expanding and growing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, obviously, new people are born every day, but the guesstimate number of how many people live on the planet, hold on. I'm actually curious to look it up. Yeah, I'm just gonna type in how many people are in the world. Okay. 7.7 billion as of 2020. So that number could be a lot more. Well, it could be more, it could be less, whatever. Okay. But think about that. There's 7.7 billion people on this planet, roughly. And 2.3 billion people have have a YouTube profile, YouTube account, and have maybe even made YouTube videos, or Fiona writes, that's too many people. Either have YouTube video, YouTube channels, or have uploaded videos on YouTube, or have commented on YouTube videos. Yeah. And again, that 2.3 billion is just how many people have a YouTube account, profile. It's not even taking into account how many viewers of YouTube there is. When I want to look for a video on YouTube, on the internet, the first website I go to is YouTube. And then I guess I mean, what other video sharing sites are there? I think there's, I don't even know what others are there. I can't even think of any right now. Daily Motion, I think, is another one. But anyway, YouTube is the king of them, right? 2 billion people have WhatsApp, right? You know how we talked about WhatsApp on Tuesday? Well, a lot of people have WhatsApp. You know, 700 million people have TikTok, 400 million people have Twitter, which I honestly thought it was more than that, to be honest with you. I thought Twitter was starting to surpass Facebook, but apparently they're not even close. But still, you know, and I imagine a lot of like billions of people have multiple social media accounts. You know, for example, you know, I privately have my own Facebook account. I have a YouTube channel. I have Facebook Messenger, and I have Twitter. You know, so that just gives you like think about censorship. When we talk about censorship when it comes to social media, this is what we have to deal with, right? This is what has to be dealt with, is 2.7 billion people, almost the entire planet when it comes to Facebook, right? Now we're going to scroll a little here. 15,000, this number is the number of moderator Facebook employees have to screen content on its services. So 15,000 people on Facebook is responsible to monitor 2.7 billion other people. So who's good at math here? Does anyone want to do the ratio or percentage of 15,000 in relation to 2.7 billion? This is not a math class. I never intended it for it to be, but I if somebody wants to do that ratio, it would be greatly appreciated, because then we could think about, well, if you're an employee for Facebook and your job is to be a moderator, how many people do you have to moderate on a daily basis? Ooh, that's just overwhelming to even think about. But it's a lot. So, you know, it's certainly harder to do than monitor, let's say, I don't know, a news network, right? Because if you're monitoring, let's say, I don't know, NBC News, I'm sure that would be a lot more manageable, or at least I feel like it is. Right. So now another cool chart that puts things into context, a little bit of a highlight. This is Facebook. Pieces of content removed, covered with a warning, or subject to other action. And this is from the first half of 2020. So this is just the first half of 2020. Maybe, you know, you can assume that if the same trend continued into the second half of 2020, then maybe you could double these numbers. But the amount of spam, 3.3 billion pieces of spam was apparently posted on Facebook and was removed in the first 6 months of 2020. You know, not million, but billion, right? Adult nudity or sexual activity, 75 million posts that involves any kind of nudity at all was flagged or taken down. Graphic violence, 40 million pieces of graphic violence was taken down. Hate speech, 32 million. You know, and again, I guess you kind of have to double these numbers if you want to talk about all of 2020. All of 2020, because these numbers just reflect the first half. You know, there isn't data right now for the second half. Now you go to YouTube, you know, the second, I think it was, yeah, the second biggest, 5.5 million videos. Oh, and by the way, this 3.3 billion, that's not even close enough, like, and by spam, do we know what they mean here, like referring to necessarily when they say spam? Like, for example, let's say you write a comment and then somebody comments on your comment of, oh, like something completely unrelated to your comment. Like, we see it sometimes, like fake profiles being written like meet hot singles, blah blah blah. You know what I mean? That's spam. In YouTube, spam or videos that are misleading or scams, 5.5 million videos. Child safety. Apparently, there are people on the planet who are posting videos of children, getting seriously hurt. When it comes to nudity or something sexual, there's a bit of a gray area, because I do know that YouTube will allow certain videos for like educational purposes, like, women breastfeeding, for example. It is nudity, but because it's like not supposed to be sexually explicit nudity, it's allowed. But, if it's nudity in the obvious sense, like the porn sense, then, it will eventually, it will eventually likely be flagged. And 2.5 million videos have been taken down, and anything violent or graphic will be taken down as well. And this is interesting because one time I was in class and we had to give presentations, and this is a soci you know a history, sociology type of class. And one student was doing a video on, I think it was some terrorist organization. I think it was ISIS, or I don't remember exactly, or Al Qaeda. I don't know, one of those terrorist organizations. And for whatever reason, the student had the genius idea of actually showing a real decapitation, like not a fake one, but an actual video of some dude's head getting cut off. And obviously that's disturbing, right? But I think it was a YouTube video, and this was like about 10 years ago. But, I mean, things like that still, resonate, right? And videos of promotion of violence or violent extremism. Now, what that means is like a video saying why we should kill X, Y, and Z, right? That's an example of a video promoting violence or violent extremism. Now we go to Twitter. Twitter is weird because Twitter, Twitter, you could post a lot of things that would be a violation for YouTube and Facebook. Twitter, full on porn is easily accessible on Twitter. And I'm not even sure there's any flags that come up, like, so, apparently showing full on, intercourse is perfectly fine for Twitter, but hateful content isn't. Abuse or harassment isn't. Sensitive media, obviously there's a lot of gray area there, or anything promoting suicide or self-harm, is banned from Twitter. And private information, I don't know, maybe posting a password, a leaked password, that is not okay. But obviously, Facebook bans a lot of people. And the argument is, even with all this in mind, that it's not enough. Now, with that being said, one more, I like this article because there's a lot of cool charts. And this gives you like a list of where the internet is free in the world and some of the restrictions that it has. And this is where the internet is not free. You know, for example, what internet is free in the United States, right? So in the US, social media companies enjoy strong liability protections and are largely self-regulating. There are growing calls for government regulation, hence why we're talking about it today. In Brazil's interesting. Brazil, it's against the law to actually, they have similar laws that Germany has, where you can't say anything that's racially insensitive. So, for example, you can't wave a Nazi flag in public in Brazil. You can't. You will go to jail if you do. And social media platforms are freely available. However, the legislator is weighing a bill that rights group fear would undermine freedom of expression. So they're essentially doing what Germany, France, and the rest of the EU is trying to do. And Germany, we just talked about, NetzDG, and that I think I actually misspelt it in the chat room. I put NETSZDG. Here it's just, that's the correct spelling. Anyway, Kenya is actually interesting. Kenya, they have social media platforms are fully accessible, but the government has asked social media platforms to take down things that are potentially sensitive, such as certain music videos. So the video blurred lines, well, the uncensored version would be taken down if you lived in Kenya. That video has a uncensored version and a censored version. Only the censored version would be allowed in Kenya. India, social media platforms are generally exempt from liability, but can be compelled to remove content. And Australia actually is doing what Germany is doing right now. The platforms are required to quickly remove videos with violent materials. Why? Because a terrorist attack was live streamed on Facebook in Australia, and that was deemed problematic. In Australia, you can't live stream a fight. Like people in the United States will live stream police brutality as a way of exposing, police officers who are, overexerting their will, right? Well, in Australia, you actually can't do that. You can't actually record something like that. Okay, now the countries where internet is not free, we got Saudi Arabia. It's interesting, Saudi Arabia and actually other countries in the Middle East, including the United Arab Emirates, you're not allowed, like, pornography is banned there. So you're actually not allowed to watch pornography in those countries. So because of that, what's seen, because of that, there have been accusations that the monarchy, which is, Saudi Arabia, they have a monarchy. They manipulate what is posted on social media. Ethiopia, they restrict, hate speech and disinformation within a day. So if you post something hateful or is full of disinformation, it will be removed within a day. Russia, Russia, actually, the government monitors is everything you do on social media. And same thing for China. And China, again, they have their own apps. I'm pretty certain you can have Facebook in China, but they have their own social media platforms that the government creates and finances and sponsors. So anyway, that's just some more contextual information about the social media and the censorship and how governments are going about it. Now, I think I'm gonna have you guys listen to now a podcast. I think it's a podcast. About somebody discussing this very topic. And actually, do you guys see this screen or do you see a different screen?
It says data and society. It's like online speech regulation,
Okay.
comparative perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you actually don't have to see my screen because it's an audio recording. But still, anyway, so this is on your syllabus. You could just click on the link on your syllabus, but I'm gonna play it right here. It's about 14 minutes. And then when we're done, I'm gonna have you guys answer the question of, how much censorship is okay, do you think that this kind of censorship will create more harm than good?
So welcome everyone to the 110th edition of Data Bytes here at Data and Society. Those of you who don't know, Data and Society is an independent research institute focused on the social and cultural issues arising from data-centric and automated technological development. So up first, I'm going to introduce Claudia Haupt. In addition to being a fellow this year at Data and Society, she is also a resident fellow with the Information Society Project at Yale Law School. She previously taught at Columbia Law School and George Washington University Law School. Claudia's research is situated at the intersection of the First Amendment, health law, and torts in the context of professional speech. You can redefine that if you want when you get up here. And she's going to be speaking to you today about online speech regulation. Take it away, Claudia.
Well, thank you very much. I'm super excited to be here. I want to talk to you today about a couple of ideas I've been kicking around about online speech regulation. And I think that we've kind of been thinking about similar issues around here. So I hope to throw out just some provocations and prompt a bit of a discussion. So let me first kind of tee up where I'm coming from on this. So as Audrey said, I'm a legal academic. I'm going to be joining Northeastern, so different part of the country, but I'm equally excited. So I'm a legal academic. I work on First Amendment issues, but I'm also a comparativist, and I'm trained in German and US law. So my lens is kind of a comparative free speech law perspective. And so looking at, online speech regulation has been interesting and challenging. So it's become a key concern for lawmakers in several countries. And you might have noticed that regulatory efforts are being met with significant criticism, in particular in transatlantic perspective, And I suggest that there's a real danger here, and that is that those who criticize the European approach to online speech regulation sometimes, I'm not saying all of them, but sometimes merely fall into this trap of trying to relitigate old debates over the permissibility and extent of regulating speech. And that's right, and that's not a critique of online speech regulation. It's just the extension of a discussion that's been waged in the comparative literature for decades. And so here's my provocation. So I would argue that the normative balance between speech protection and speech regulation as a constitutional matter has been struck in different ways around the world, both on the national and the supranational levels. And this fundamental balance is unlikely to be upset by new speech mediums. All right, I see you are all outraged at this point. Okay, so what does that mean? So let me take a concrete example. So there's a new German law, it's called the Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz. That's the short title. And we call it NetzDG, okay? So that law aims to better enforce the country's existing hate speech prohibitions and other criminal code prohibitions on social media platforms. Okay, so it takes an existing legal regime and it tries to implement it online.
Okay, so in other words, these laws that Germany has already existed, but it didn't apply to social media. It just applied to, like, you know, movies, video games, which is, you know, public speech, right? Now they're trying to implement those same laws for when it comes to social media, right? So they're trying to act as if social media is public speech, which in many ways it is, if you think about it. Anyway.
And so what's, you know, predictably perhaps, one of the main critiques of the law, it's Germany censors speech. All right, so let me just take a step back, pause for a second and point out that I think that censorship is a super unhelpful term in this context. All right, so like Jack Balkin, for example, I prefer the term speech regulation over censorship. So Balkin notes that people generally consider censorship to be impermissible, but not all regulation of speech is unjustified, right? And I think that's exactly right. And we regulate speech all the time, right? So fraud, true threats, child pornography, right? You get the idea.
So now again, I just paused there because remember this person, Claudia Haupt, I think is her name. She is saying that there is a difference between censorship and speech regulation. Like, for example, you can't say bomb on an airplane, right? You know, that's I mean, you can't say bomb on an airplane. It has nothing to do with freedom of speech per se, or child pornography, right? You can't post child pornography on the internet. You know, you could try to claim that it's freedom of speech, but you're probably not going to be successful in that claim. You know, et cetera, et cetera.
So, and in comparative perspective, there's another layer of why censorship isn't a analytically helpful term. So typically, most constitutional regimes outside of the United States protect freedom of expression, subject to certain limitations, right? And the constitutional text typically includes a limitations clause. And I'll give you two examples. One is the European Convention on Human Rights, and the other one is from the German Basic Law. All right, so here you have the European Convention on Human Rights, and you see that everyone has the right to freedom of expression, but then you see this typical non-US, right, limitations clause in section 2. So everyone has the right to freedom of expression, blah, blah, blah. But then the exercise of these freedoms may be subject to restrictions as prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society. And what that means, of course, is subject to interpretation by the European Court of Human Rights, and there's a rich case law on that. The point is that it's very clear that there are limits on free speech. So here's the same thing in the German Basic Law. Everyone has the right to freely express whatever they want. And in fact, there's no censorship. But then you see the limitations clause again in section 2. So these rights find their limits in the general laws and so on and so forth. This is completely unremarkable as far as constitutional drafting around the world goes. In fact, this is what most constitutional provisions of that sort look like. All right, so back to NetzDG. So remember, the idea was that the law's goal is to replicate existing criminal code provisions online. That's what the law tries to do. It does that in a really annoying way if you look at the statute, because it just lists all of the provisions of the criminal code without explaining what they are. So I tried to be nice and made a list for you. So that's a list of all the crimes that are addressed in NetzDG. But as you notice, I said, these are existing enumerated provisions out of the criminal code, right? So these things are already illegal if you do them offline. This thing just says, whatever you can't do offline, please don't do that online. Okay, not please, but it's, you know. Okay, so you can't do this stuff offline, don't do it online. So one very common criticism of this law, which is of NetzDG, is that Germany prohibits hate speech and the US doesn't. Well, that's true, but that's also really, really, really old news. And I suggest that drawing out the old debate over whether to regulate speech in the first place is really unhelpful in trying to design or assess new regulatory regimes for online speech, and it actually obscures deeper theoretical concerns that are raised by the nature of online speech. So where does that leave us? So we have different sets of free speech values, and those free speech values will be expected by supranational and national governments and their citizens to be equally applied online and offline. That's the whole idea I was just talking about. All right, so national or supranational legal systems that have struck the balance in favor of hate speech regulation, for example, will try to seek such regulation to be mirrored online as well. That's the NetzDG example. I'm not trying to say it does so successfully or even constitutionally from a German perspective, right? So the point isn't this is great. The point is just, this is not at all surprising.
It's 11:30.
So you have a set of rules that governs life elsewhere. You can kind of expect that that set of rules would be applicable in the online space as well. So any emergent theory of online speech regulation must acknowledge that, for better or worse, it will not likely be the American understanding of free speech, which is an outlier in its protection of hate speech and other forms of expression that are impermissible elsewhere. It's unlikely to be that understanding of free speech that will govern online around the world. And the challenge lies in identifying whether or to what extent online speech regulation is different from offline speech regulation, right? So I said, you know, all we're trying to do is take the offline stuff and put it online. Well, maybe that doesn't work because of some features of online speech. Once we figured that out, we need to figure out what, you know, how new regulatory regimes should account for that difference. But that first requires understanding the national and supranational frameworks of speech protections and their respective limits in which regulation of online speech occurs before we can assess the extent to which regulation might be compatible across systems. Okay. So you might have noticed that the US has a peculiar way of treating free speech. The First Amendment is usually wielded as kind of a all-purpose weapon when people want to say whatever it is they want to say, right? No matter what it is, stupid or racist or you name it. And it seems to me that the dominant theory of free speech in the online speech discussion is the marketplace theory, which is one of a couple of standard free speech theories in the US. So we generally attribute this to Justice Holmes, who said that the best test for truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market, right? So what could possibly go wrong in trying to find truth in that way online? There's also a strong notion of First Amendment absolutism in the US, which basically means once it's protected as speech, that's the end of the story. Now combine that with internet utopianism or idealism, and you can see exactly how we ended up where we are. You also may have noticed that the rest of the world doesn't do it that way, or if you haven't noticed, I guess I just told you. So US free speech exceptionalism is a pretty noticeable phenomenon in the real world. And Europe and Germany in particular has a very different attitude towards free speech and especially hate speech. I guess you could oversimplify and say that that's because they've experienced the downside most immediately. But that's not really the full story, because there are different First Amendment traditions in the US as well. They just get glossed over in the discussion of online speech regulation. So there are First Amendment theories that are built on autonomy, speaker autonomy for the most part. And then there are theories of democratic self-government that are alternatives to this marketplace conception. And they may actually be more useful when we think about the questions raised by online speech. So despite the fact that the marketplace theory and First Amendment absolutism seem to dominate the tech literature and the online speech literature in the US, we should be a little more careful in trying to decide whether we want to adopt that paradigm or perhaps we should reconsider. So what do I suggest we do now? I know that what I have to do now is
So anyway, just a brief little recap on the last couple of points she made. There is an acknowledgement that freedom of speech in the United States is a little different than freedom of speech, you know, in other parts of the planet. You know, other parts of the planet, there's like freedom of speech, but with some restrictions. In the United States, freedom of speech is, well, it's, as she said, like an all-purpose weapon for being able to say essentially whatever you want. Now, there is still some things you're not allowed to say, like, again, bomb on an airplane, right? But it's definitely more free. It's definitely more free in America, where, you know, the worst thing that happened, I mean, you are seeing more, you know, more repercussions happen when somebody posts something racist, you know, on social media these days, right? But a few years ago, you know, I would notice all the time people posting, you know, things that maybe they didn't realize it was racist, but it actually kind of is. You know, I mean, there was what's her name? She was an actress actually in the Star Wars TV show, The Mandalorian. Oh my God, I'm totally blanking on her name. But she posted something on Twitter that I think was like denying the Holocaust, you know, and people said, well, that's anti-Semitic. And that, you know, Twitter shot her down and she was eventually fired by Disney. You know, so that is one way how Twitter is regulating itself, but it's, you know, it's not like the US government though told Twitter, hey, Twitter, you got to take that post down. At least not that we know of, right? Maybe the government did tell Twitter to do that, but we don't know. Officially, it didn't. But anyway, let me play the rest of this video.
Wrap up soon, but what should we do now? So we start from the premise of largely settled arrangements regarding the scope and limits of constitutional speech protection that differ among nations. So I think it's the first step to just start with that premise. Different things exist in the world. Then we try to understand regulatory efforts elsewhere within their constitutional context, and I would argue also their historical context. Just be aware of the historical forces that have influenced this constitutional balance. So then we can assess the new legislation in its own constitutional framework. So for NetzDG, that means it may be running up against domestic constitutional law in Germany, but the point is not that hate speech regulation is impermissible. The point is that it may not fit with interpretations of the existing free speech regime. And there's a large body of court decisions interpreting the constitutional provisions in the extent to which criminal provisions can limit speech. So in other words, this has nothing to do with the First Amendment, right? This is a purely German domestic law question. So then the next step is that this deep skepticism toward European regulatory efforts may be misguided because it obscures what the extent to which regulation might be possible in the US. And so that's the important point we get to when we get to talk about the transnational or the global level, because then we have to figure out what is actually permissible as a regulatory effort elsewhere. But we should only be doing that after we understand the regulatory framework at its point of origin. So I guess the takeaway is we need much deeper engagement, really, with the range of free speech theories that already exist in the United States, and we need much deeper engagement with the comparative literature on freedom of expression before we can meaningfully assess challenges of online speech regulation. Thank you.
So I think the point there is that there needs to be like communication with, you know, establishing what is permissible when it comes to free speech, right? Before these laws can be enacted. But I'm gonna ask a question for you guys, and I want you to spend, I mean, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but we have enough time for you guys to answer this question. And that is, do you think NetzDG causes more harm than good? And can it be used as a basis for potential US social media speech regulation laws? In other words, what I'm asking is, do you think that NetzDG, could it be a good thing? But does it create more problems than actually solves? And do you think something like this could be applicable in the United States? Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I feel like NetzDG could be helpful if it's managed the right way.
Right.
Okay. Well, you know what?
Sorry, continue.
Let's take 5 minutes. Well, I'm not sure if 5 minutes is enough time, but because we're like running out of time, you know, let's take a few minutes to answer that question though. Let's take about 5 minutes to like write it down somewhere, and then I'll, you know, read everyone's responses. All right, so I mean, this is a super complex topic, and so it's like I know it's like impossible to answer it in just 5 minutes, but we're gonna do. We some people have done their best, right? So I'm gonna start with, and I think I might have to like somehow save these messages somehow because I have a feeling this is a conversation that's going to bleed into next week. Um, Alexia says Nets DG can be helpful in today's society only if it's managed the right way, right? Because as we know, it's flawed. Um, Anything can take a turn for the worse if not managed the right way, and the same thing goes for Nets DG. Without proper management, unharmful comments can be taken down for silly reasons. Yeah, that's true. You see anything can hurt anyone's feelings when taken into consideration their mindset and mental states. Yeah, I mean, we know, I mean, it's happening right now. Dave Chappelle had a stand-up special on Netflix where he said a joke about you know, people who are transgender, and that has angered a lot of people, right? Meanwhile, he's a comedian. He's saying jokes, but apparently this joke was harmful for some people.
I'm
If
not
an
saying stuff like that because stuff like that can be easily controversial. I'm saying like easy stuff, like saying, "Oh, I just got pepperoni pizza and it didn't really taste so good."
oh,
If
well,
someone is in a bad mental state and they read that and they really like pepperoni pizza, they could feel personally attacked and they could be like, "Oh, well, I think pepperoni pizza is good. Do you have a problem with that?" or something like that.
hmm. Well, it is interesting how like how people would even go about this monitoring of censorship, right? Because if it's done by, let's say, a bot that's looking for certain keywords, and then you're flagged for using one of those keywords, then that's kind of ridiculous, right? But
To
if
me,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
no, it's
I
okay.
wanted to say like with my idea, I think it's like it's probably done by people in and of itself. Like I think it should probably be some sort of job which people should be allowed to do, like whatnot, rather than having it be random bots which you look for keywords. It should be people
Yeah.
who can read it and truly understand like what they're talking about and see the context of it. And then it's like, and then be able to judge it properly based off of that. It shouldn't just be unreliable things such as bots and servers and stuff, which automatically look at certain words and be like, all right, just automatically take it down if it has a word like that or something akin to that. I'm like, no.
Yeah. So
So
maybe I'm sorry. So maybe we need to have social media detectives or police officers that are actual people who could exercise some kind of common sense, right?
Finish reading the comment. There's more to be said.
I know. Don't I'm getting to it. All right, you see, where did I leave off? You see anything for silly reasons. You see anything can hurt anyone's feelings when taken in consideration their mindset and mental state. If an unharmful comment hurts someone's feelings and that person became mentally distressed because of it, that comment might be taken down, which becomes a tricky situation. Shouldn't the comment be allowed to repost, or should it be permanently taken down to be considerate of anyone's feelings and mental states? Can we really prevent causing mental distress in others? You know what? I mean, if you think about it, maybe even this could cause people to be mentally distressed about what they posted. Like maybe if somebody is running a YouTube channel, they will not just think about what they're posting, but become mentally stressed out about what they should post and what they shouldn't post, which I guess would make, force people to become more responsible about what they do and say online. But maybe that would cause some unnecessary mental stress. And yeah, it is a good question though. Can we really prevent causing mental distress in others? I guess we could try to limit it, right? As much as we possibly could, but we can never actually, you know, make it go away entirely, right? Which is part of the reason why I do think a lot of people say that Nets DG can actually cause more harm than good, because A, it's never going to make the problem go away completely, and B, it could harm a lot of people for very petty reasons, you know. But anyway, let's see Elmore, what he has to say. It has good intentions, but getting the person's personal information leaking out to the public is harsh. Yes, I would agree. If everything is done privately without telling the public at first, and then investigate until found guilty, then the police can punish it out to the public. Well, I mean, here is the thing. Usually I would think that there is some kind of evaluation of a certain post, and then after it's deemed inappropriate or insensitive, then yes, after that is public. But I still feel like even then there's a problem with it. I think this would be more acceptable than just revealing everything before having enough evidence. Like you said earlier, some people might not know or intend to post something harmful, and thereby revealing their information just after this is kind of harsh. Nets DG can be used in the US if used correctly, because right now, most information in public online tends to be false. Well, I would say a lot of it certainly is false. There seems to be too much racism going on. And if Nets DG is applied, it can reduce the amount of hate or racism content that is posted. But people's privacy must be respected until found guilty. Right. So the debate over privacy, yeah, definitely does apply when it comes to Nets DG. But also in the United States, when it comes to the First Amendment, as we know, it's a tricky situation, because there isn't laws saying you can't wave a flag with a swastika, right? Because that's seen as a violation of freedom of speech. Our idea of freedom of speech is definitely not as restrictive. So, and if we do try to have formal laws approved by Congress, would that then be a violation of the First Amendment? Would we fall into the same situation that France went through? Again, to update what happened in France, France has freedom of speech laws, right? And because the French government tried to apply Nets DG, or their own version of it, the courts got involved and actually prevented France from having their own version of this. And I would imagine that would be even more difficult to pass in the United States. But anyway, let's see what Jacqueline says. It is a good idea with eliminating hate speech on social networking sites, but I can see where it can be a huge issue, especially here in the US, where the First Amendment is really pushed. The question is this violating my First Amendment rights? Will rise within the people, and with what Alexia said, I think it could be a good tool with management, Without it, I think it can be really bad because any comment with hints of insult or hate can be reported. Yeah, right, that is like what happens when somebody posts something harmful or hateful on Facebook, a lot of people will, or Twitter, a lot of people will say, oh, well, this person has a right to say it because it's protected by freedom of speech. But then the counter argument would be is that, well, no, because Facebook is a private company. Facebook is privately owned. Same thing with Twitter, same thing with YouTube, right? And because it's privately owned, it could have all of its own rules of what is permissible speech, right? But if you're, let's say, if you have a permit and you want to organize a protest out like in the public eye, that's different. The government, the US government can't ban you from saying something racist, for example. You can't go to jail for saying something racist. But Facebook can remove you because there is no such thing as like Facebook jail. I guess the closest thing would be, your page being taken down or your page being blocked. In other words, Facebook isn't run by the government. But if the government were to try to pass its own censorship laws, then and forces Facebook to enact those laws, then perhaps it's a violation of freedom of speech, right? So that's why I kind of say that, a system like NetzDG really can't work in the United States. It really can't, because then it would be like automatically people would say it's a violation of my constitutional right, And, an even more philosophical question I have for you guys is, does it really stop people from being racist, right? Does banning racist comments and racist posts, does it really help the problem at all of racism? Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, all it really, if you think about it, all it's really doing is preventing people from openly expressing their freedom. I mean, expressing their racism, right? But it doesn't stop people from being racist. So I don't know. I mean, is there any way we can actually even prevent people from even considering posting something like that? I mean, we see, like the threat of fining or banning or flagging, but are there other ways that we could, even get people out of the desire to post something racist to begin with? I don't know. It's a tough question, right? But do you know what I'm asking? Does it make sense? No, it doesn't make any sense.
Actually, could you repeat it again?
Yeah, my question is, I think a more important question that we should have is that why would somebody even post something racist or hateful or, insensitive? Is it just to get attention, or is there another reason?
Yeah, no, to be
It's
honest, it
12
depends.
o'clock.
Yeah,
Sorry.
to be honest, it depends on the person, because like in some cases, there are some people who really do believe in the race remarks and are just putting it down what they believe and whatnot. But in some cases, it could also be people trolling and not being serious. But regardless, I'm like, when people make remarks like that,
I think it'd just be overall better to probably just look at it and seeing the context of it, take it down depending on like the context and like whether or not people were in debate of these different discussions. Because like it's okay to have your own various opinions, but if it's a very toxic type of opinion or a very obvious opinion which will hurt others, then that's when it's like you have to really think if it's like something that should be taken down, really. Because I'm like, it depends upon the person
Yeah.
and the area that they're in the community.
Yeah, it definitely does depend on the individual. And the reason why I feel like this question is important is because, you know, all that it's really doing, right? Having these, and don't get me wrong, I do think some speech regulation is necessary. It is necessary, but I'm not sure how it could be applied in the United States. But B, and more importantly, does it really help solve the problem of racism in America, right? Or anywhere in the world for the matter, because all this is doing, if you think about it, all it's doing is preventing people from openly expressing their racism. But it doesn't really fix the problem of racism. I mean, maybe you can argue that if less people are exposed to racism, then you don't spread it, right? Like maybe racism can spread like a virus, where if you keep telling someone the same thing, then they'll start to believe it. And then therefore, if you keep saying to people that, I don't know, eugenics are a real thing, and that there's a scientific basis for it, then maybe people will actually start believing that eugenics is actually a real concept. I mean, do we know what eugenics is? It's actually a really complex thing, but you know, it and I really can't explain it in 3 minutes, but it's a belief that, you know, put like all humans were separated in like different almost subspecies, you know, we're all like separated in different subspecies, and each species follows the same traits, you know, like people from one part of the world are inherently smarter than people from another part of the world, right? That's pretty much the really short version of what eugenics is. And the scary thing is that this concept was actually taught as like fact in schools for a long time, uh, until it was disproven or even seen as like a form of racism. Okay, before we wrap up, Elmore actually uh, uh, made one more comment. I was thinking of the First Amendment when speaking of privacy, but although freedom of speech is great, people are taking advantage of that. But then again, if we stop freedom of speech, the government gets more power, which is bad. Yeah, it's kind of messy. What if fines are applied? Can this reduce the amount of hate or racism going on? But even if we do all that, it can't stop racism from spreading out. What can what we can do is teach the younger generations about why diversity is important. I think this would help spread diversity and people to accept each other. Yeah, so maybe what we really have to do is twofold. We have to A, educate people, and B, try to like quiet the um ignorant people from spreading their beliefs that's based on their ignorance. Because really that's what racism is all about, is being ignorant of other people's races and applying that ignorance to, well, that entire race, and becoming angry and hateful based on that ignorance, you know. So education, I think, is more important, really, if you think about it, than, than censorship. Right? Because the more people we educate, maybe the need for censorship will just eventually phase out, or at least become more manageable.
Because once they become like used to this type of stuff, or they've learned about how this stuff is common in a sense, or these viewpoints might be common around, they might be able to calm themselves down rather than like taking everything so like seriously in a sense. Or in some cases, like they'll be like, I respect your opinion, but I personally feel this way. I'm like, all right then.
Yeah, yeah,
We'll have our several ways of looking at that.
right. I mean, that would definitely help the situation, especially when, like two people arguing online, if both of those people were educated about what they were talking about, then maybe a more civilized conversation can be had. Because yeah, I feel like a lot of the times, reason why people argue with each other so fervently online is because really they might be passionate, but how educated are they really?
Right. Exactly.
Anyway, it's 12:05, and I think we should continue this conversation on Tuesday. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is like maybe repost this question, or if we're meeting in person, I'll rewrite it on the board, and then we begin class with this conversation. Anyway, thank you guys. I'll see you on Tuesday. And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. On Tuesday, I do want the first draft for your second essay. And again, it could be a rough draft, and it's going to be I'm going to write all instructions for this. Okay. So look out for that. If you have questions for me, let me know. And yeah, I'll see everyone on Tuesday.
All righty. Take care, everyone.
Yep.
Mr. Bartolone.
Yep, you too. Take care, guys.
Have a nice weekend.
Yep, you too.